Hello and welcome to Shaken Not Burned, a cocktail of solutions for a sustainable future. Today we're talking about a very important issue that actually affects our day-to-day, but many of us don't think about it because there isn't enough discussion about it. So in today's interview, which we'll play in a minute, I am talking to Sepa Siraj, founder of digital agency Pixeled Eggs, about the concept of sustainable web design. Did you know that the internet and communications technology sector is estimated to account between 1.5% and 4% of the world's carbon emissions? In comparison, aviation represented only 2% of the global carbon footprint in 2022. And this figure is only about emissions, right? And data centers consume a lot of energy, but also a lot of water to cool down. And then our devices that we use every day, our phones, our laptops, our earphones, they're all made of materials that are extracted and processed and transported around the world. So this has a significant impact on both climate in terms of emissions, but also on nature in terms of resource use. So all this data that is generated online, including this podcast episode, has its own footprint, but it's hard to see it. It's not like the exhaust of a car or a plane. We don't really know the impact that we made by using this data. And with the advent of AI, we can only assume that this footprint will continue growing and growing. And in fact, one particularly startling statistic is that 90% of the world's data is estimated to have been generated in the last 2 years alone. So really, there is a lot to think about when it comes to the footprint of our internet. Of course, the internet is great. No one is advocated to stop using it or using it less. It's just about using it mindfully. And this is what we're going to discuss today with Sepas about how we can make our websites leaner, more sustainable, yet accessible and pretty. It also turns out that a website that is lighter weight performs better than others. So there are many advantages to sustainability beyond just doing the right thing. So if you have a website or if your company has a website, it's something to really consider when changing the design or even creating it from scratch. And so we hope that this episode will be helpful to anyone thinking about design. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Sepas. I'm joined today by Sepa Siraj, founder at Pixeled Eggs. First of all, I love the name. Can you tell us a bit about what Pixeled Eggs does?
Hi. We're a digital agency and we specialize in working with purpose-driven organizations. So most of our clients come from either charity, nonprofit, environmental organizations, and actually for-profits that are trying to help us live in better ways.
So today we're going to talk about sustainable web design, right? So is it something that you specialize in? Can you maybe give me an example of a project that you would work on?
Yeah, it's something that we've been trying to do and I guess learning as we go along. I think there are some guidelines around it now. A few years ago, there really wasn't a lot of talk about this, but recently there are many more organizations getting involved in the conversation. And I think for us, it's something that we're experimenting with and learning as we go along. And we're trying to do our bit, I guess, and just do what we can to reduce the carbon footprint of the products that we create. So there are different things that you can do, technical things, design and UX thinking comes into the conversation as well, and really we're on a bit of a mission to educate everyone that we work with that this is a problem that needs to be talked about and for people to care about it, because we understand, it's like with anything, that we understand that us or a handful of other people doing things a certain way isn't going to make a massive difference. I think we need a global change of some kind. But we still feel that it's our responsibility to do what we can to reduce the carbon footprint of our websites.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that people maybe are not fully aware of. So this is why we're so happy to have you in the podcast today, because it would be really great to expand on it. So what is the problem with the internet and its carbon footprint?
Internet's is a pretty horrible industry when it comes to the carbon footprint. I think it's on par with the aviation industry.
Wow.
And it's producing something like 5% of the global emissions worldwide, which is just crazy if you think about it. It's not something that you see, but it's something that's definitely there. And if you add to that the devices that we use to access the internet, then I think it's even bigger. And the problem is that with the way that the internet has developed over the years, we're now producing twice the amount of greenhouse gases than we were 10 years ago, which is crazy on its own. But now with AI in play, that's going to double again in about a year and a half. So if you think about it, at some point it's probably going to become the worst industry when it comes to global emissions. And I think something needs to be done to try and reduce that. So a lot of people don't know about it because it's not something that we see. It's not, like a car or airplane that's producing something visible that we can relate to. But there are, so many data centers around the world, so many devices, and all of those are energy consuming. Data centers need energy to operate, obviously, but they also need energy and water actually to cool. And a lot of them are housed in old buildings that are really not designed for this kind of thing. So it's not a great industry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And as much as it has, many benefits in lots of ways, it's still something that I think we need to really be concerned about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be great to maybe expand a bit on exactly what generates these emissions. And, we can go beyond maybe just talking about emissions in this chat. We can also, as you mentioned, there is a water use, there is obviously the materials. So we can just say maybe the impact on the environment at large. So we've got the data centers. Which are the buildings that store all our data, right? And the data can even be something like this call or a Google Doc or all the photos that we've got on our phones, right? They all are linked back to the data centers. And then you mentioned devices. So, can we talk a little bit about the impact of our devices?
Yeah. So, phones, computers, your second screen, anything that you leave switched on, or plugged in, all of that has an impact. And then depending on what we do with it, so, obviously you and I are talking on a video call, that has some kind of an impact, but it's probably less than us traveling somewhere to meet each other to do this in person. So there are benefits as well. I don't think that should be forgotten. Yeah. I think there's always a bit of a balance for these kind of thing. And to be honest, it's nuanced. It's not simple. I don't think we can just say, well, we'll stop doing this and the world will be a better place. I think there's a lot that you need to think about. And then what you do on your devices as well has a bit of an impact. So if you're continuously playing video, for example, you're going to run through your battery a lot quicker than you would do if you weren't. So the impact it's really, really difficult to measure. I think people are attempting that. And actually from a website perspective, knowing exactly what the impact of your website is I think it's almost impossible to measure the carbon footprint of any particular website, because there are so many factors involved. time of day, how much traffic there is on the internet and on your website, which data center is being accessed. There are so many things that come into it that it makes it very, very hard to measure it. But the fact is that if you add it all together, as an industry and as the set of devices that we use and the websites that we access are producing carbon emissions.
Okay. And so how can someone who has a website, what elements make a website a bit less impactful?
So there's a few things that you can do that are actually easy enough to do. And I think the one that has probably the biggest impact is to move the hosting of your site to a company that's using renewable energy. So green hosting is probably the single most impactful thing you can do. And these days, there are actually quite a lot to choose from. If you go to the Green Web Foundation's website, there are many partners that they list that will host your site using renewable energy, green energy. And I think that's where you should start. So if we all moved our website to an organization that uses renewable energy, it would make a massive difference. There are other things as well. There are technical things you could do. For example, auto-playing videos on a website. So, you often get this kind of background video that's running. It's usually meaningless. It probably doesn't add anything to the user experience. But it's there, and it's there as decoration. And it's energy consuming because all that data needs to be transferred. Someone is consuming that data. It's it has an impact. And okay, on its own, on one website that doesn't have a lot of traffic is probably not making a huge difference. But if you add it all together, then there is a major benefit from not having auto-playing videos. And I appreciate that we could do that on all of our websites, but then there's a thing called TikTok, which is encouraging people to just scroll through hours and hours of auto-playing videos. And that in itself is a problem. And I think that there needs to be better guidance, and I think people need to be more informed about what they're doing and make better choices. But auto-playing videos and stopping them is probably a good thing to do.
So would you say that in an ideal world, a platform like TikTok wouldn't have auto-playing videos?
Absolutely, yeah. If it was up to me, I will ban them tomorrow from doing that. And it's not just TikTok; it's everything else. Instagram, Facebook, all of the
they all
social
have the
media.
Same model these days, right?
Yeah, and they'll run through an algorithm, and they just keep playing these videos. I was on a bus recently. This is totally irrelevant, but I was on a bus actually in Rome. I was there for a conference, and there were maybe 30 people on the bus. And I looked around, and I was the only person not on my phone scrolling through videos. Every other person had their phone down, and they were just kind of doing this.
It's hypnotic, isn't it?
It is, yeah, completely. And I'm not suggesting we stop people watching these videos. I think they have a place in our lives, but I think we can reduce the impact of it by not auto-playing everything and just serving it out to people.
Yeah.
There are other things as well. There are technical things you could do, things like caching, how you write your code, how you minify your code. All of that has an impact. Things like reducing server requests. Having smaller websites actually has a really big impact. I mean, so many sites now have so many legacy pages that no one even looks at, and all of that needs storage. There is data transfer involved. They appear in search engines. Someone might click on it, and it's an article from 12 years ago. It's completely irrelevant. So there are other things you could do, but I think videos, hosting, and actually your content, your images, and how you format and how you serve out your images on your website are probably the biggest things that you can do.
I actually have an anecdote as well that maybe will horrify you. I used to work at a publication that had been going on for decades, and the website, sometimes when you upload an article that you write, you put a lot of tags because you want people to see it. And then it turns out that each tag was its own page. And we had and there was a person that was in charge of cleaning all the tags, and he went through the whole website and manually removed all these pages that were thousands and thousands of pages. And so we had these really long sessions where he said, please do not just randomly tag, because you will create a new page and we will just have the infinite tree of tag pages. And I imagine the footprint of that must have been insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And you add all of the websites in the world that do that.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have a really major impact. I think actually general housekeeping is a really good idea on any website. And we sometimes we sell in the idea of the sustainable website just through performance, because it's an easier sell. If you tell your client that your site's going to perform better if we do these things, it's going to be lighter weight, Google's going to index it better, and actually your content will be more relevant because you're getting rid of things that are not relevant to people. You have a smaller website with an easier to follow UX and information architecture, so structure of the website. Then it's an easier sell. But actually, that's another important point. The structure of the site is something that's really important as well. So people being able to quickly and easily find the information that they need is really important. In the past, we used to care a lot about things like how long people spent on your website. And I think that's probably still relevant if you're running an e-commerce site, for example. You want people to browse around your shop and find things. But actually, someone coming to your site, finding the information that they need straight away, reading it, and then leaving is okay, is totally fine. And that is probably what you should be aiming for. And all of that just creates a leaner experience, less energy consuming experience, both for you and what you're hosting and what you're serving out, but also for users and the devices that they're using and the time they're spending on the internet. So I think it's what I meant, but it is nuanced. There's a lot to it.
Yeah.
There isn't like a magic bullet that will fix everything, or you stop doing this and everything will be fine. There's lots of different things that you need to take into account. But I think we should all be talking about it, and we should all be caring about it, and actually applying those principles to our sites.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say not everything will be relevant for everyone either. So it's just, it's picking the ones that you think suit you, because like I say, if you're an e-commerce site, you're trying to sell a product, and you might want people to hang around. So you might create an experience that's a bit more sticky, and I think that's okay. But if you're not, then someone coming, reading, and information and moving on is a good idea.
Yeah, and I think it's a near universal experience, this one of the websites, because most of us have a social media presence, and we can think about how we go about it, and obviously the social media use, but also most people that work for a company that will have a website. So these conversations can happen internally, even if we're not the people in charge of this website. We can still open this discussion with our colleagues and see where that takes us, because as you said, if there is a benefit of it's more sustainable but also more easier for the user, then that's all you want, right? Is it something that is being discussed much in the user experience space?
I'm seeing a lot more about it. I think 2-3 years ago, there was hardly anything. There was no real discussion around any kind of benefit around this. I think the thing that changed it maybe is that the Google algorithms around SEO and how speed is all king now. So, the load speed of your page makes a massive difference. So it's that performance angle that I think started people talking about it. But I'm seeing a lot more information and discussion around the sustainable angle as well. So creating experiences that are lighter weight, not just because they perform better, but because also they're less energy consuming. So yeah, it is definitely a topic that's on the rise within the UX world.
Interesting that sustainability is really arriving to every single sector in the world. It used to be the most obvious ones, but now it creeps up in every conversation, which is great because, everyone, we can do our part. And another issue about the sustainable sites is accessibility, correct? So that's something to take into consideration when designing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I see accessibility as just, as just standard good practice that we should all be doing regardless of the impact of it, because surely everybody wants their website to be inclusive and for everyone in the world to be able to come there and browse through and have a look at your information. So I see accessibility as just, standard good practice. I think it should just be the thing that you do by default, without it even being something that you need to discuss or make a thing about. It's complicated again. There's a lot that goes into it. Again, there's technical things, there's user experience and design things that you need to consider. And then there's a lot about your content that you need to think about as well. So, there are, as with all of these things, it's never simple, but it should be the default thinking. So if you're an organization designing and developing a website and creating content for it, then accessibility should be part and parcel of what you do.
What is a classic example of an accessible website? What cannot be missed?
I mean, the sort of standard way of thinking about it is that it needs to be accessible to people using assistive technology. So whether that's a screen reader or some kind of device that allows you to navigate through the website without using a keyboard or a mouse, for example. And actually, what gets read out on a screen reader, there's a lot of things around color contrast, for example. So people with visual impairment, I think I've got a little bit of color blindness, so I don't see certain greens and reds all that well, and I can't actually read some text online when it hasn't been designed well enough. So there's lots of different tools out there now as well, actually, that you can just bolt onto your website, and it takes care of some of those sort of accessibility requirements that are maybe more difficult to achieve through technical means when you're designing your website. Sorry, I hope I answered the question.
You completely answered. I imagine it's a lot of elements, but I was curious, and for our listeners that may be not too familiar with the concept of accessibility, just get a general idea of what really that means, and you answer that perfectly.
Yeah, there are other things as well. I mean, there are sort of just neurodiversity, just people consume information differently. So it's not just that someone's blind, for example. It could just be the way that you write the information, and for it to be simple and using simple words that is easy for people to understand and consume. That could be an angle of accessibility that often doesn't get talked about.
So the actual communication, the content, rather than
the content,
how
absolutely.
the content is presented.
Yeah. We do a lot on design and the technical side, how we code our websites to make sure that they're accessible. But if the content isn't accessible, then none of that really means anything. So, I think it's right across the whole process. It's starting from understanding what users need, the user experience, how you design a website with the choices you make around colors and font sizes and things like that. And then, how you build it technically, and then what you write and what you add in terms of content.
Yeah. And going back to the issue of sustainability, so you said the website would be lean. That doesn't mean bare, right? You can still build a pretty website that is also sustainable.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's not, we're not suggesting that people just create black and white websites. Um, although they do tend to work quite well in certain certain situations. If you look at I think the government website is a really good example where just a purely text-based website is actually functioning really quite well from a UX and design and technical
The
perspective
UK
as well.
government's website.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've
yeah,
used
it's a
it a
good
lot
example.
and I can confirm. I really
Yeah,
like it. It
it's
works really
simple,
well.
it's well designed, it's really easy to follow and understand. I think a lot of thought has gone into it, and is a good example. But we're not suggesting that that's right for everyone. People. Design is important. You need a well-designed site that includes branded elements, and all of that requires colors and imagery and content. So yeah, it's not, the suggestion isn't to to remove all elements of design from a site. It's to think about what you're doing a little bit more, and to make decisions that are not just based on brand and colors and aesthetics, but also on performance and also on sustainability. I think design has become harder, even though it's been simplified. And I think the responsive design and the use of websites and small screens has simplified design patterns over the years. I used to be a Flash developer, going back sort of 20 years, where everything was just crazy and lots of things would move, and you could do all this crazy stuff on a website. And over the years, that's become much more leaner and simplified. But I think there's still more we can do.
Do you find that your clients are receptive when you talk to them about sustainable websites?
Our clients are, but it's probably because of the sector that we play in. So, working with charities and with environmental organizations, for us, it's a relatively easy sell. But I don't believe that all clients do necessarily care about this stuff. I think they should, but I don't think they all do. So my advice to agencies is that you can go down the performance angle, and create something that performs better, and by doing that reduces energy use and its impact on the environment.
You said that it's really hard to measure the impact of a website. So I'm thinking, if I'm a company measuring my scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, then it's perhaps convenient to not be able to measure the website, which, if you are a huge organization, it could be actually quite significant, even if it's, quote unquote, just the website. What do you think of that?
I mean, I think it is. To be honest, I don't know a lot about calculating carbon. I've tried to learn about it. I'm by no means an expert in that field. And from what I understand, most of it is based on parameters that are essentially guesswork. But I mean, they can still give you a relatively accurate measure, I guess, or at least something to give you a baseline, something to work with. And I think there's definitely a place for that. But I don't think any of them are massively accurate, especially when you're dealing with something that has so many parameters. You can measure so many different things on a website: its weight, how many server requests it makes, where your site is hosted, how it's cached. There's just an enormous number of parameters that goes along with it. And if you were calculating that, you would have to simplify it for it to work, because otherwise it would just be a very, very complex calculation that probably would be not all that meaningful. But yeah, I think there's definitely a place for having an idea and a baseline and something to give you a target, maybe. But I don't think I think you should see it as a pattern as opposed to some accurate figure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think any conversation would be complete without discussing AI, which you did mention earlier. So I think there is a lot to consider there. I mean, it feels like most companies these days are considering how they can use AI. And fair enough, it can give you a competitive advantage. It can it can work really well. So you can't blame companies for trying to find the best ways in which AI can help them. But how can they be mindful of this use?
Yeah, AI is interesting. I mean, I think we have to find a way to use it responsibly because, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that it's a very, very energy consuming industry. There was there is a podcast on the BBC called Artificial Human, and there was a discussion about that a few months ago. And one of the stats that they handed out was that just ChatGPT, so on its own, not even considering all these other generative AI tools that are out there, consumes the same amount of energy as 180,000 US homes.
Wow.
I mean, that's just mind blowing. It's actually quite scary. And then, you add to that things like spam emails that are generated by AI, and it's actually probably closer to 1 or 2 million homes, equivalent to powering those many homes that we're using every day. So I think it needs to be used in a kind of a mindful way. Now, personally, I think AI is amazing. The nerd in me and the fact that, this thing can actually solve many of the problems that we're trying to solve now. That it exists at all is actually amazing. And I think we have to be careful how we frame the conversation. I was listening to another program yesterday, a food program actually, and they were talking about the use of single-use plastic and how companies are trying to reduce that. So things like yogurt pots, for example, we no longer get the little plastic lid that used to come on top of it.
Yes.
And that's great. We're reducing plastic and that's all wonderful. But what that's doing is then you've got this film that sits on top of your yogurt, and maybe your food doesn't last as long as it used to. So it's actually causing food waste. So we've reduced something, but increased maybe a bigger problem, which is food waste. So I think we have to be careful how we talk about AI because it's here. It's going to definitely stay here, but it needs to be used in a responsible way so that we can get the most out of it. I think what we should stop doing is using ChatGPT as a search engine because that's not the right thing to do. I think a single search on ChatGPT is something like 30 times the amount of power than it would be on Google. So, I think people should have a think about what they're using these generative AI tools for. But in the right hands, I think it can solve a lot of our world's problems. And I don't know how you mitigate for this. It probably requires some really strong legislation, as with anything like this. But AI itself is amazing. We just need to figure out how we power it. And that could lead to other innovation. That can actually lead to innovation around energy. So these companies know that they need that power, and they might invest in more renewable sources of energy, and that in itself could be a good thing. But at the moment, that doesn't exist, and so we're just consuming, a huge amount of energy. We're emitting an enormous amount of CO2 for these AI models. And I think everyone just needs to think about how they use it more responsibly.
Yeah, I suppose it's an issue that every company, every individual will have to address individually, because everyone will use these technologies in a different way. But yeah, I'm certainly guilty of searching. I once searched recipes on ChatGPT just to see how it was. So I did use it as a search engine. I didn't even think of that concept. But yeah, when you think you can just Google it, then yeah, it's the most straightforward way.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's it's a bit like how you would recycle. You and I recycling probably doesn't make any difference to the world. I think that it needs everybody en masse to be recycling for it to make a difference. Obviously, we all have a responsibility, and I think we should do what's in our power, what we can do. But AI, being used, for example, in medicine or in healthcare, is huge amounts of benefit from that. So many people are going to benefit from it, and I think there is a trade-off, and we need to understand that. But it's great. Where we're not doing so well is that half the internet traffic is coming from bots, probably either coming from an AI tool, or they're trying to farm your content on your website to teach a model. That's the kind of stuff that we need to stop, and that needs big organizations and governments to get together and have a discussion about it and figure out how to stop it.
Absolutely. And going back to sustainable websites, is there anything else that we haven't covered? I am quite new to the topic, so I'm not sure if there is anything that we've been missing.
No, I think we've covered all all what I think are the bigger, more major things. I mean, there's actually lots of other things that you can think about. Use of colors, for example, and how that impacts the energy consumption on a device. So the choices you make around colors become important.
Like if they're really bright, they will use more energy?
That's right, yeah. So darker colors tend to use a little bit less energy. Although I'm actually reading some difference in opinion around that particular topic at the moment. So again, it's difficult to measure, but I think generally speaking, dark modes exist because they are a little bit less energy consuming. Things like fonts, for example, your choice of fonts can have an impact. So some fonts are called variable fonts. They're all of the different weights and styles are packaged into one file. You download that one file, and it's a relatively small file, and all of that font is included in it. Some other fonts are, you have to if you've got a bold and italic, 2 different weights, then that's 4 different files that you need to download. So that increases the server requests, increases the weight on your website. So there's lots of little things I think that you could be doing and thinking about. But on the whole, things like video, images, and hosting are probably the things to start with if you're new to this.
And what is the weight of a website? Is it the actual weight in kilos?
File size. So how many megabytes you are downloading on a user's device,
Right.
which needs to go and hit the server, grab that data, bring it onto your device. So it's just how many megabytes you have on there. One of the other things we're seeing is just long pages. These days are actually kind of unnecessary. There used to be a way of doing things, and in that you add a lot of information on your homepage, and you'd be like, these are all of the services we provide, and here's our latest news, and there's a testimonial about something that we did. So what you end up with is this enormous page that has a lot of weight, a lot of megabytes that you need to download. And everything we see from a data perspective is that no one actually scrolls down that far. People don't go beyond a couple of scrolls down, if that, and they find the information that they need, probably through navigation or through something higher up in the page. So, going back to having a leaner website, you could probably lose a lot of that information, have a smaller page that performs better.
Okay, so all the effort for nothing, we might as well have
Absolutely.
a smaller one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is on every site that we see, the data we look at is that people just don't scroll that far down. To be honest, people don't scroll that far down beyond the fold. So unless it's there in that first page, in the top bit, people tend not to go further down to do a lot of exploring on other content on the page. It's different when you get deeper into the site. So if you've got like an article or some information or a report or something like that, and someone's there and they're interested in it and they are scrolling down the page. But those key landing pages don't need to be massive.
Right. You could have a really pretty top of the page and the rest of the page is just blank. There's nothing. Just black and white and sustainable.
Pretty much. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could do that. I mean, I'd love to. I think clients need to drive these kind of things. We could come up with these ideas as an agency, but it probably needs to be demanded more by clients rather than be something that a few or a handful of agencies care about or think about doing. But yeah, I mean, I think that will come, to be honest. I think that will come just through the performance side of things, because everybody now understands that a massive page, which weighs a lot and is slow to load, is bad for your SEO.
Yeah.
And everybody wants their site to perform well in SEO. So it's probably going to come regardless.
Amazing. Well, that's great to always end on a positive and encouraging note. So thank you so much, Sepas, for your time and for joining our podcast.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for following us once again. Don't forget to sign up to our newsletter and follow us on social media. See you next week.